The music room fell silent as Mr. Chen tapped his baton against the podium. His eyes scanned the classroom until they landed on the newest addition to Westridge Academy's prestigious music program. "May," he said, his voice firm but not unkind, "since you've been with us for 3 weeks now, perhaps you'd like to demonstrate your skills for the class?" Mei Lin kept her eyes fixed on the sheet music in front of her, her shoulders tensing slightly. She had hoped to remain invisible a little longer. At 20, she was older than most first-year students at the academy, having taken 2 years away from music entirely before gathering the courage to apply. "I'm still getting familiar with the piece." "Sir?" she replied softly, her voice barely audible over the gentle hum of the air conditioning. Mr. Chen sighed. This wasn't the first excuse he'd heard from her. "Very well. Next time, then." As the class resumed, May felt the curious glances of her classmates. They wondered, as did all the teachers, why someone who barely played had been accepted to one of the most competitive music academies in the country. What they didn't know was that Headmistress Wu had recognized her name immediately during the application process. She had seen something in May's audition tape that convinced her to give the young woman a chance, despite her mysterious 2-year absence from the piano. When class ended, May gathered her belongings slowly, hoping to avoid conversation. It didn't work. "You know, hiding won't make them any less curious," came a cheerful voice. May looked up to see Hannah, the only person at Westridge who had made consistent efforts to befriend her. With her bright smile and gentle persistence, Hannah had somehow managed to occasionally break through May's carefully constructed walls. "I'm not hiding," May said unconvincingly. "I just don't see the point in playing unfinished work." Hannah leaned against the piano. "Everyone plays unfinished work here. That's literally the whole point of school." She tilted her head, studying May with genuine curiosity. "What are you afraid of?" The question hit too close to home. May zipped her bag with unnecessary force. "I'm not afraid. I'm just private. Private enough that Professor Harlow thinks you can't actually play. I overheard him talking to Dr. Kessler yesterday. They're concerned about your progress." A flash of panic crossed May's face before she could hide it. Professor Harlow was her primary instructor, a brilliant pianist known for his exacting standards and limited patience. In the month since term had begun, their one-on-one sessions had become increasingly tense as she refused to play anything substantial. "Let them think what they want," May said, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. Hannah shook her head in exasperation. "You're going to have to play eventually. The mid-semester evaluations are in 3 weeks." As they walked out of the music building, the autumn air crisp against their faces, May remained silent. The campus of Westridge Academy sprawled before them, a collection of elegant brick buildings surrounding a central quad where students gathered between classes. It was beautiful, prestigious, and terrifying. "Want to grab coffee?" Hannah asked, seemingly untroubled by May's silence. May was about to decline, as she usually did, when she spotted Professor Harlow crossing the quad with Dr. Kessler. She quickly ducked her head. "Actually, yes. Coffee sounds good." The small cafe just off campus was packed with students, the air filled with the rich aroma of coffee and the chatter of post-class conversations. May and Hannah found a small table in the corner, partially hidden behind a large potted plant. "So," Hannah said, wrapping her hands around her mug, "are you ever going to tell anyone why you're really here?" May stared into her tea. "I'm here to study piano." "Right, that's why you avoid playing at all costs." Hannah's tone was light, but her eyes were concerned. "Look, I'm not trying to pry, but something doesn't add up. You got into Westridge, which means you must be talented, but you act like the piano might bite you." For a moment, May considered telling Hannah the truth. About the competitions she'd won as a teenager. About the concert hall in Shanghai 3 years ago, packed with people who had come to see the young prodigy everyone was talking about. About the way her fingers had frozen over the keys as panic clawed at her throat, the silence of the audience deafening as they waited for her to begin. Instead, she took a sip of her tea and said, "I just need more time." Hannah seemed to sense she wouldn't get more. "Okay, but time is something Professor Harlow isn't known for giving. Rumor has it he once made Yo-Yo Ma himself wait in the hallway because he was 5 minutes early to a master class." Despite herself, May smiled. "Is that true?" "Probably not," Hannah admitted with a laugh. "But he is tough. And fair warning, he doesn't accept excuses." Later that evening, May sat alone in one of the practice rooms in the basement of the music building. These small soundproofed spaces stayed open until midnight, and at 10 p.m. most were empty. She liked coming here late, when she could be certain no one would hear her. She placed her hands on the keys of the upright piano, feeling the cool ivory beneath her fingertips. Once this sensation had been as natural as breathing. Now it filled her with dread. Just scales, she whispered to herself. Just start with scales. She began slowly, her fingers moving through the familiar patterns of C major. Up and down, the simple progression soothing her nerves. She moved to G, then D, picking up speed as muscle memory took over. By the time she reached B-flat minor, her hands were flying across the keyboard with fluid precision. Without consciously deciding to, she transitioned into Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, the piece she had been meant to play that night in Shanghai. The haunting melody filled the small room, her hands remembering what her mind had tried to forget. For a few precious minutes she lost herself in the music, the weight on her shoulders lifting as her fingers danced across the keys. She didn't notice the door opening slightly, didn't see Professor Harlow pausing in the hallway, his eyebrows rising in surprise as he listened to the flawless performance coming from a student he'd begun to think was hopeless. When the piece ended, May sat in silence, tears streaming down her face. This was why she had come back, for these moments when the music spoke through her without fear getting in the way. But the thought of playing like this with eyes watching, judging, expecting, the familiar tightness returned to her chest. Professor Harlow quietly continued down the hall, his mind working. What he had just heard didn't match the reluctant, seemingly unskilled student from his class. Something else was going on, and he intended to find out what. The next morning, May arrived early to her scheduled lesson with Professor Harlow, hoping to get through another session of technical exercises without having to perform anything substantial. She knocked tentatively on his office door. "Come in," called his crisp voice. Professor Harlow sat behind his desk, his silver hair neatly combed, his posture impeccable even while sitting. Unlike many of the younger faculty, he always wore a suit to teach, today's being a deep navy with a subtle pinstripe. "Good morning, May," he said, studying her over his reading glasses. "Please sit down." Something in his tone made her nervous. She perched on the edge of the chair across from his desk, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "I've been reviewing your application materials," he said, opening a folder. "Your audition tape was interesting." May said nothing. The tape had been a recording of her playing a simple Bach prelude, technically correct but deliberately uninspired, just enough to meet the minimum requirements. It had been Headmistress Wu who had recognized her name and requested additional information. "Headmistress Wu seems to think you have potential," Professor Harlow continued. "But after a month of lessons, I have yet to see evidence of it." He removed his glasses, fixing her with a direct gaze. "Unless, of course, one happens to be walking past practice room B at 10:30 in the evening." May's heart sank. He had heard her playing. The one time she had let her guard down, allowed herself to truly play. "I don't know what's going on with you," Professor Harlow said, his voice surprisingly gentle, "but I do know that the young woman I heard last night is not the same one who sits in my class pretending she can barely play a C major scale." May stared at the floor, her chest tight. "You have a gift, May, but gifts require courage." He leaned forward. "The mid-semester evaluation is in 3 weeks. I expect to see the pianist I heard last night, not the one who's been hiding in my classroom." When May didn't respond, he sighed. "You can go. Please prepare Debussy's Clair de Lune for our next session." "The full piece, not just the first page." May nodded and fled the office, her heart pounding. In the empty hallway, she leaned against the wall, trying to calm her breathing. Her carefully constructed plan was falling apart. She had hoped to ease back into playing gradually on her own terms. Now Professor Harlow knew, and soon everyone would expect her to perform. The panic she had kept at bay for weeks began to rise, threatening to overwhelm her. But beneath it, almost too quiet to notice, was something else, a tiny flicker of relief. Perhaps being discovered was exactly what she needed. 3 days had passed since Professor Harlow caught May playing in the practice room, and she had skipped every piano lesson since. She knew she couldn't avoid him forever, but each time she imagined sitting at the piano with him watching, evaluating, her chest tightened and her hands began to shake. Today she had hidden herself in the library's far corner, surrounded by tall bookshelves filled with musical biographies and sheet music collections. The quiet space had become her refuge whenever she needed to escape the pressure of the academy. "Found you," came Hannah's familiar voice, breaking through her thoughts. May looked up from the book she'd been pretending to read. "I wasn't hiding." Hannah raised an eyebrow as she slid into the chair opposite. "You missed theory class. And lunch. And apparently 3 lessons with Harlow." She leaned forward, lowering her voice. "The entire department is talking about you, you know." May's stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" "Well, first there's the fact that you're avoiding Harlow, which nobody does unless they want to fail." Hannah ticked points off on her fingers. "Second, Dr. Kessler was looking for you earlier. And third," she paused for dramatic effect, "there's a rumor going around that Headmistress Wu specifically requested your admission despite an unremarkable audition tape." May closed her book with a sigh. "People should mind their own business. People always talk. It's what they do." Hannah studied her friend's face. "But you could shut them up by actually playing something. Prove you belong here." The thought made May's palms sweat. "It's not that simple." "It never is," Hannah agreed, surprising May with her understanding. "But you can't hide forever. Harlow left a message with me. Faculty meeting tomorrow at 2 p.m., room 310. You're required to attend." May felt the familiar panic rising. A faculty meeting meant all her professors would be there. Professor Harlow, Dr. Kessler, Mr. Chen, possibly even Headmistress Wu. All watching, all judging. Did he say what it's about? Hannah shrugged. "No, but it can't be good if they're calling a special meeting just for you." That night, May barely slept. Her mind raced through all the possibilities, each worse than the last. By morning, dark circles had formed under her eyes and her hands wouldn't stop trembling. She tried to distract herself by attending morning classes, keeping her head down and avoiding conversation. When lunch came, she found a quiet bench outside, away from the busy cafeteria. The autumn leaves drifted around her, red and gold against the blue sky, but she hardly noticed their beauty. "You look terrible," Hannah said, appearing suddenly beside her with 2 sandwiches. She handed one to May. "Eat. You'll need your strength to face the firing squad." Despite everything, May laughed. "You're not helping." "Sure I am. I brought food." Hannah sat beside her. After a moment of silence, she said, "Whatever happens in there, it's not the end of the world. You know that, right?" May took a small bite of her sandwich, though her appetite had vanished. "You don't understand." "Then help me understand," Hannah said quietly. "What are you so afraid of?" May stared at the ground, watching a leaf spiral down to land at her feet. Perhaps it was time to trust someone. "I had a bad experience," she said finally. "A really bad one. At a concert." Hannah waited patiently for her to continue. "I was supposed to play Chopin. It was a big deal. Sold-out concert hall, important people in the audience. And I just froze." The memory still made her chest tight. Couldn't play a single note. Just sat there until they finally closed the curtain. "That sounds awful," Hannah said softly. It was, but the worst part came after. May's voice dropped to almost a whisper. "My teacher at the time, he'd been like a father to me since I was 8. He said I'd embarrassed him, that he was done wasting time on someone who couldn't handle pressure." "What a jerk," Hannah said with unexpected fierceness. May looked up, surprised by her friend's reaction. "He had invested years in me, countless hours, so? You were what, 17? 18? Everyone messes up. That doesn't give him the right to crush you." Hannah shook her head in disgust. "No wonder you're afraid to play now." The clock tower chimed, signaling 1:30. May felt sick. "I should go," she said, standing. Hannah stood too. "Want me to walk you there?" May nodded, grateful for the offer. Together they crossed the quad toward the music building. Autumn sunlight streamed through the windows as they climbed to the 3rd floor, casting long shadows across the polished hardwood. Room 310 was a small conference room used for faculty meetings. When May knocked, Professor Harlow's crisp voice called for her to enter. Hannah squeezed her arm in encouragement, then watched as May took a deep breath and stepped inside. 5 people sat around an oval table. Professor Harlow at the head, his silver hair catching the light. Dr. Kessler, the department chair, a stern woman whose reputation for bluntness preceded her. Mr. Chen, who taught theory and composition. Professor Ito, who led the chamber orchestra. And to May's dismay, Headmistress Wu herself, elegant and inscrutable as always. Ms. Lin, Headmistress Wu said with a slight nod. Please sit. May took the empty chair at the far end of the table, trying to keep her hands from shaking visibly. Do you know why you're here? Dr. Kessler asked, her pen poised above a notepad. May swallowed hard. I assume it's because I missed several lessons. That's part of it, Professor Harlow said. But primarily we're concerned about your overall participation in the program. Mr. Chen leaned forward. You attend classes but barely contribute. You practice late at night when no one can hear you. You've been here almost 6 weeks and none of us has heard you play properly. His tone was puzzled rather than accusatory. It's an unusual situation. Especially, added Professor Ito, for someone who was personally admitted by Headmistress Wu. All eyes turned to the headmistress, who remained impassive. I stand by my decision, she said simply. Dr. Kessler tapped her pen against the table. The issue is whether Ms. Lin stands by her commitment to this program. We have limited spots at this academy. Many talented students were turned away to make room for you. The guilt May already felt intensified. She knew it was true. She was wasting an opportunity others would cherish. I understand, she said quietly. And if you think I should withdraw, that's not what we're suggesting, Professor Harlow interrupted. At least not yet. Professor Ito nodded in agreement. We're proposing a challenge instead. May looked up confused. A challenge? Yes, said Dr. Kessler. The mid-semester evaluations are in 2 weeks. We want you to prepare a specific piece to perform. A knot formed in May's stomach. What piece? Professor Harlow slid a folder across the table. Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 3 in D minor. May stared at the folder in disbelief. Rachmaninoff's Third was notoriously difficult, one of the most technically demanding pieces in the classical repertoire. Professional pianists spent months, sometimes years, perfecting it. 2 weeks isn't enough time, she said, her voice barely audible. For most students, no. Headmistress Wu spoke for the first time since her initial greeting, but I believe you could do it with focused effort. The implied faith should have been reassuring, but it only added to May's anxiety. How much did Headmistress Wu know about her past? If you succeed, Dr. Kessler continued, you'll have proven your place here beyond any doubt. If not, she left the sentence hanging. The meaning was clear. Succeed or leave. Professor Harlow must have seen the panic in May's eyes because his voice softened slightly. We're not asking for perfection, Ms. Lin. We're looking for commitment, for the willingness to push beyond your comfort zone. But May knew what they were really doing. They were setting her up to fail, giving her an impossible task to justify removing her from the program. Or perhaps they were testing a theory, trying to see if the rumors about her were true. May I have some time to consider this? She asked, struggling to keep her voice steady. The faculty exchanged glances. You may have until tomorrow morning, Dr. Kessler said finally. But be aware that declining the challenge will be viewed as declining to continue in the program. May nodded stiffly and stood, clutching the folder of sheet music. Thank you for the opportunity, she managed to say before leaving the room. Hana was waiting in the hallway, pacing anxiously. Well, what happened? May couldn't speak. She handed Hana the folder and leaned against the wall, closing her eyes. Rachmaninoff's Third? Hana's voice rose in disbelief as she flipped through the pages. Are they insane? Nobody masters this in 2 weeks. They know that, May said flatly. Hana's eyes narrowed. They're trying to force you out. Or force me to play. May pushed away from the wall. I need to think. They walked in silence to the dorms, the weight of the decision hanging between them. At May's door, Hana hesitated. What are you going to do? May looked down at the folder in her hands. Part of her wanted to pack her bags and leave tonight, to escape before facing another humiliating failure. But another part, a part she thought had died 3 years ago in Shanghai, stirred at the challenge. I don't know, she answered honestly, but I think I need to be alone right now. Inside her small room, May placed the Rachmaninoff on her desk and sat on the edge of her bed. The setting sun cast long shadows across the floor as she weighed her options. Leave now, with her dignity intact, or stay and risk public failure, again. As darkness fell, she opened the folder and began to read through the score, her fingers unconsciously moving as if playing the complex passages. The familiar notes stirred something inside her, a memory of who she had been before fear took over. By midnight, she had made her decision. Morning light filtered through the curtains as May opened her eyes. For a moment, she forgot about everything. The meeting, the challenge, the decision she'd made at 3 a.m. after hours of internal debate. Then reality crashed back and she sat up, pushing her tangled hair from her face. On her desk, the Rachmaninoff score lay open, already marked with pencil notes she'd made during her late-night study. She'd finally fallen asleep with the music still playing in her head, her fingers twitching against the bedsheets as if pressing invisible keys. A knock at her door startled her. She glanced at the clock, 7:30 a.m. "May, are you awake?" Hannah's voice called softly. "I brought coffee." May opened the door to find her friend balancing 2 steaming cups and a paper bag that smelled of fresh pastries. "You're up early," May said, stepping aside to let her in. "Couldn't sleep. Too worried about you." Hannah placed the breakfast on the desk, carefully avoiding the sheet music. She studied May's face. "You look like you barely slept either. Did you make a decision?" May took a long sip of coffee before answering. "I'm staying," she said quietly. "I'm going to play the piece." Hannah's eyes widened. "Seriously? You're actually going to tackle Rachmaninoff in 2 weeks?" 13 days now, May corrected, gesturing to the calendar on her wall where she'd circled the evaluation date in red. "And yes, I'm going to try. But," Hannah seemed at a loss for words, "it's practically impossible. Even professional pianists—" "I know," May cut her off. "But I've played it before." This revelation stopped Hannah mid-sentence. "You've what?" May sat on the edge of her bed, cradling the coffee cup in both hands. 3 years ago, I was preparing it for the International Piano Competition in Vienna. I never got to perform it there, but I had learned most of it. Understanding dawned on Hannah's face. "That's why Headmistress Wu suggested this piece." "She knows," May nodded. "She must have done her research after seeing my application. The question is whether I can relearn it in time." She glanced down at her hands. "And whether I can actually perform it without—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Without freezing up, Hannah completed for her. "Like in Shanghai." "Like in Shanghai," May echoed. Hannah sat beside her, their shoulders touching in silent support. "So what's the plan?" "Practice. Every moment I'm not in class. I've reserved practice room D from 6 p.m. until midnight every day for the next 2 weeks." "The one in the basement? With the old Steinway?" Hannah asked, surprised. "Why not use one of the better rooms?" "Because it's isolated. Fewer people will hear me when I mess up." May took another sip of coffee. "And I need to meet with Professor Harlow this morning to officially accept the challenge." "Want me to walk you there?" May smiled gratefully. "Actually, yes." An hour later, showered and dressed, May stood outside Professor Harlow's office, Hannah at her side. The folder containing the Rachmaninoff score was clutched tightly against her chest. "You've got this," Hannah whispered, giving her arm a squeeze. "Just tell him you accept and get out. Simple." But May knew it wouldn't be that simple. Nothing about this situation was simple. Still, she knocked on the door with more confidence than she felt. "Come in," Professor Harlow called. He was alone this time, reading glasses perched on the end of his nose as he reviewed what looked like student essays. He glanced up as May entered, setting his pen aside. "Ms. Lin, I was expecting you." May placed the folder on his desk. "I accept the challenge," she said simply. Professor Harlow studied her face as if searching for something. "Are you certain? This isn't a decision to make lightly. I'm aware of the difficulty, but I believe I can do it." He leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled beneath his chin. "May I ask what changed? For weeks you've been reluctant to play even basic exercises in front of me, and now you're willing to tackle one of the most difficult concertos in the repertoire?" May had prepared for this question during her sleepless night. "I realized I have a choice. I can let fear control me, or I can try to overcome it. I'd rather fail trying than wonder what might have happened if I'd had the courage to try." Something flickered in Professor Harlow's eyes. Approval, perhaps, or surprise at her candor. "Very well," he said after a moment. "We'll schedule daily sessions—" "No," May interrupted, then quickly added, "I'm sorry, but I need to work through this on my own first. I've reserved practice room D every evening. I'll come to you when I'm ready for feedback." He frowned. "That's not how this usually works, Ms. Lin." "I understand. But this isn't a usual situation." She held his gaze, silently pleading for him to understand. After what felt like an eternity, he nodded. You have until the end of the week to practice alone. After that, I expect you in my studio every day at 4 p.m., no exceptions. He raised a hand when she began to protest. That's my final offer. Take it or leave it. I'll take it, May said quickly. 4 days of private practice was better than none. As she turned to leave, Professor Harlow added, And Ms. Lin? I hope you know what you're doing. So do I, she thought as she closed the door behind her. True to her word, May began her intensive practice that very evening. Practice Room D was tucked away in the basement of the music building, accessible via a narrow staircase that few students bothered to use. The room itself was small, with water stains on the ceiling and a perpetual chill in the air. But the old Steinway, while not as perfectly maintained as the newer instruments upstairs, had a warmth and depth to its tone that suited Rachmaninoff perfectly. May began with the first movement, breaking it down into manageable sections. Her fingers were stiff at first, struggling to stretch for the piece's notorious reaches that spanned tenth intervals. By midnight her hands ached, but she had reacquainted herself with the first 3 pages. The next day passed in a blur of classes she barely registered, her mind constantly returning to passages of Rachmaninoff. During lunch she sat with Hannah but barely spoke, her right hand tapping out rhythms on the table as she mentally rehearsed. You know, most people eat food with their hands, not music, Hannah teased, nudging her back to reality, May said, forcing herself to take a bite of her sandwich. It's just there's so much to relearn. How did it go last night? May flexed her fingers, still sore from the previous day's work. Slow, but I'm remembering more than I expected. Day 2 of practice went better. Her muscle memory began to awaken, fingers finding patterns they had mastered years before. She worked until her hands cramped, then soaked them in warm water before continuing. On day 3, she reached the cadenza in the first movement, a notoriously difficult solo passage that had been her stumbling block 3 years ago. Her hands trembled as she approached it, memories of past failures threatening to overwhelm her. 3 times she started and stopped, unable to push through. You can do this, she whispered to herself, closing her eyes. 1 note at a time. On the 4th attempt, she made it through, not perfectly, but without stopping. It felt like climbing a mountain and finally glimpsing the other side. By the end of her 4th day of solo practice, May had worked through the entire first movement and parts of the second and third. Her progress surprised even her, though she knew she was far from performance ready. When she arrived at Professor Harlow's studio the next day at 4 p.m., she was exhausted but determined. He greeted her with a nod, gesturing to the gleaming Bosendorfer grand piano that dominated the room. Show me what you've accomplished, he said simply. May sat at the piano, adjusting the bench, taking a moment to feel the keys beneath her fingers. The familiar panic began to rise, someone watching, judging, but she pushed it down, focusing on the music. She began to play the opening of the first movement, her hands shaky at first but gradually steadying as she lost herself in the familiar patterns. When she reached the end of the exposition, she stopped, not yet ready to attempt the development section under scrutiny. Professor Harlow was silent for a long moment. You've played this before, he finally said. It wasn't a question. May nodded. 3 years ago, before Shanghai. She looked up sharply. You know about that? He adjusted his glasses. Headmistress Wu shared some of your background with the faculty after yesterday's meeting. It explains a great deal. May wasn't sure how to feel about this revelation. On one hand, it was a relief not to have to explain her past. On the other, she hated the thought of being seen as damaged or fragile. I'm not that person anymore, she said firmly. Clearly not, Professor Harlow agreed, surprising her. The student I heard just now has tremendous potential. With proper guidance, you could be exceptional. He closed the fallboard over the keys. But you're holding back. You're playing the notes but not the music. I'm still relearning the piece, May protested. No, you know the notes. What you're afraid of is feeling the music. His voice was gentle but firm. Rachmaninoff wrote from his soul, Ms. Lin. To play his work, you must be willing to access your own. The truth of his words stung. She had been approaching the piece technically, deliberately keeping emotional distance to protect herself from the vulnerability that had led to her breakdown in Shanghai. Your assignment for tomorrow, Professor Harlow continued, is to play the second movement, just the opening theme with complete emotional honesty. No hiding. May left the studio feeling unsettled. Technical mastery she could achieve through sheer determination and practice. But what Professor Harlow was asking felt dangerous, like deliberately removing armor before walking into battle. That night in Practice Room D, she worked mechanically through the technical passages of all three movements, building speed and accuracy. But when she attempted the soulful, melancholic opening of the second movement, trying to access the emotional depth Professor Harlow had demanded, tears sprang unexpectedly to her eyes. She stopped playing, startled by her own reaction. For years, she had kept her emotions carefully contained when playing, seeing them as a liability rather than a strength. Now she was being asked to deliberately lower those defenses. Outside the practice room, unseen by May, Hannah listened with a small smile. For the first time since they'd met, she was hearing her friend truly play, not just notes, but music that spoke of pain and possibility and something like hope. 8 days until the evaluation, May thought as she resumed playing. 8 days to not only master one of the most difficult pieces in the classical repertoire, but also to overcome the fear that had silenced her for 3 long years. She squared her shoulders and began again, this time allowing herself to feel every note. The day of the mid-semester evaluation arrived too quickly. May woke before her alarm, her heart already racing though the sun had barely risen. She'd practiced until past midnight, pushing through exhaustion, determined to master every passage of the Rachmaninoff. Her hands ached, her shoulders felt tight, but she'd done it. She could play the entire concerto from memory, even the treacherous cadenza that had once defeated her. But technical mastery wasn't enough. Professor Harlow's words echoed in her mind. You're playing the notes but not the music. Over the past week, their daily sessions had evolved from technical critiques to deeper discussions about interpretation and emotional expression. He'd pushed her constantly to lower her defenses, to allow herself to feel the music rather than just execute it perfectly. Yesterday, during their final session, he'd seemed satisfied with her progress. You're ready, he'd told her, his usual stern expression softening slightly. Just remember, music isn't about perfection. It's about communication. Play like you're telling your story. Now, as May sipped the tea Hannah had brought her, chamomile with honey meant to calm her nerves, she wondered if she really was ready. Not just to play the notes, but to be vulnerable in front of an audience again. You're going to be amazing, Hannah said, perched on the edge of May's bed. She'd shown up at 7 a.m. with tea and encouragement, her unwavering support a lifeline during the past 2 weeks. May attempted a smile. I'm terrified, she admitted. What if it happens again? What if I freeze? Hannah reached out to squeeze her hand. Then you'll start over. Or you'll walk away and try again another day. But it won't be like Shanghai. You're not alone this time. The evaluation was scheduled for 3 p.m. in the small recital hall. All day, May moved through her classes in a fog, barely registering the material. Her teachers didn't call on her, perhaps sensing her distraction or having been informed about her afternoon performance. At lunch, she couldn't eat. The sandwich Hannah brought her remained untouched as she stared out the window, watching students cross the quad, envying their carefree laughter. You should eat something, Hannah urged. You need your strength. I can't, May said, pushing the plate away. My stomach feels like it's full of butterflies. Angry butterflies with sharp wings, Hannah laughed. That's quite an image. But seriously, at least drink some water. Being dehydrated won't help your playing. May obediently sipped from her water bottle, knowing her friend was right. As the hour approached, her anxiety mounted. At 2 p.m., she retreated to a small practice room for one final run-through. But her hands were shaking so badly she could hardly play. After struggling through the opening bars, she stopped, placing her palms flat against the keys without pressing them. This is ridiculous, she muttered to herself. You know this piece. You can do this. But knowing and believing were different things. The memory of her failure in Shanghai kept intruding. The packed concert hall, the expectant silence, the crushing panic as her hands froze above the keys. A knock at the door startled her. Professor Harlow entered without waiting for a response, his tall figure filling the small room. It's time, Ms. Lin. May nodded, unable to speak. She followed him through the corridors to the recital hall, each step feeling heavier than the last. Outside the hall's double doors, Hannah waited, giving her a thumbs up. I'll be right in the front row, she whispered as May passed. Just look at me if you need a friendly face. The recital hall wasn't large, just 100 seats or so, but to May, It suddenly seemed vast and intimidating. Most of the seats were empty, but the front rows held the faculty panel. Dr. Kessler with her ever-present notepad, Mr. Chen looking thoughtful, Professor Ito with his usual inscrutable expression, and Headmistress Wu, elegant in a navy blue suit. To May's surprise, there were other students present as well. Hana had taken her promised seat in the front row, but behind her were a dozen or so unfamiliar faces. Word of the Rachmaninoff challenge had apparently spread through the academy. Professor Harlow guided her to the gleaming Steinway that dominated the stage. "Remember," he said quietly, "tell your story." May sat at the piano adjusting the bench, taking a moment to compose herself. The silence in the hall was deafening, every eye fixed on her. She placed her hands on the keys, took a deep breath, and froze. It's happening again, she thought in panic. Just like Shanghai. Her hands hovered above the keys, trembling slightly. The seconds stretched painfully as her mind went blank. From the front row, she heard a small, deliberate cough. Hana. She glanced down to see her friend mouthing words. One note at a time. One note at a time. It was what May had whispered to herself that night in the practice room when she'd finally conquered the cadenza. She closed her eyes, blocking out the audience, the judges, the weight of expectation. One note at a time. Her fingers found the first chord, the gentle opening that belied the complexity to come. The sound filled the hall, resonant and clear. And then, almost without conscious thought, she was playing the second chord and the third, the familiar pattern unfolding beneath her hands. As the introduction gave way to the main theme, May's anxiety began to recede. The music took over, drawing her in, reminding her body of the countless hours of practice. Her fingers moved with increasing confidence, finding the right keys, the right touch, the right feeling. By the time she reached the development section of the first movement, she had almost forgotten the audience. There was only the music, the surging emotions of Rachmaninoff's masterpiece flowing through her. When the cadenza arrived, that moment that had once defeated her, she tackled it with newfound courage, allowing the cascading notes to pour from her fingers. The first movement ended with a triumphant chord, followed by a brief silence. May didn't look up, already focusing on the lyrical opening of the second movement. This was where Professor Harlow had pushed her hardest, demanding emotional honesty, vulnerability. The haunting melody emerged, tender and melancholic, each phrase shaped with care. May finally risked a glance at her audience. Professor Harlow was leaning forward slightly, his expression intent. Dr. Kessler had set aside her notepad. Even Mr. Chen, usually restless during performances, sat perfectly still, and Hana was smiling, tears glistening in her eyes. The connection with her friend gave May a final surge of confidence as she launched into the fiery third movement. Her hands flew across the keyboard, meeting the technical challenges with newfound freedom. When the final chords resounded through the hall, powerful and decisive, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years, the pure joy of music shared. For a moment after the last note faded, there was complete silence. May sat motionless, hands still resting on the keys, hardly daring to breathe. Had she done enough? Had she proven herself worthy of her place at Westridge? Then came the sound of a single person clapping, then another, and suddenly the small audience erupted in applause. Hana was on her feet, grinning broadly. Several students in the back were standing too, their faces alight with excitement. Even Dr. Kessler was applauding with unusual enthusiasm. Professor Harlow approached the piano, a rare smile transforming his austere features. "Well done, Ms. Lin," he said quietly. "Very well done indeed." Headmistress Wu joined him, her composure intact but her eyes warm. "I believe that answers any questions about Ms. Lin's place at this academy," she said, addressing the faculty panel but smiling at May. Relief flooded through her, followed by a wave of exhaustion. She had done it. She had faced her worst fear and survived. More than survived, she had triumphed. The nightmare of Shanghai no longer defined her. As the applause continued, May finally stood, her legs shaky but her heart lighter than it had been in years. She gave a small bow, unable to keep the smile from her face. Dr. Kessler approached next, tucking her notepad into her jacket pocket. "Remarkable progress in just 2 weeks, Ms. Lin. I look forward to seeing what you can accomplish with proper time to prepare." Mr. Chen added his congratulations, followed by Professor Ito, who actually bowed slightly, a rare sign of respect from the formal orchestra conductor. But it was Hana who reached her first when she finally descended from the stage, enveloping her in a fierce hug. "I knew you could do it," she whispered. "I just knew it." May hugged her back, grateful beyond words for the friendship that had helped her through the darkest moments of the past 2 weeks. "I couldn't have done it without you," she said, meaning it. As they pulled apart, May noticed a man standing at the back of the hall, partially hidden in the shadows. He was older, with silver-streaked black hair and wire-rimmed glasses. Something about him seemed familiar, but before she could place him, he turned and quietly exited through the rear doors. "Who was that?" she asked Hana, gesturing toward the now empty doorway. Hana shrugged. "No idea, maybe another faculty member? Or someone's parent?" Professor Harlow appeared at May's elbow, following her gaze. "Is something wrong?" he asked. May shook her head, dismissing the strange feeling. "No, everything's fine. Better than fine, actually." And it was true. For the first time in 3 years, everything felt right. She had reclaimed not just her ability to play, but her love for the music itself. Whatever challenges lay ahead, and there would be many in her demanding program, she now knew she could face them. As she and Hana left the recital hall together, surrounded by congratulating students curious about the mysterious pianist who had mastered Rachmaninoff in 2 weeks, May felt a sense of belonging she had thought forever lost. "So," Hana said with a grin, "what are you going to play for your end-of-semester recital? Maybe all 24 of Chopin's etudes?" "In a day?" May laughed, the sound surprising even herself. "Let's just enjoy this victory first. Tomorrow is soon enough to think about the next challenge." But secretly she was already wondering, with her confidence restored, what might she accomplish next? 2 weeks had passed since May's triumphant performance of Rachmaninoff's Third Piano Concerto. The story had spread throughout Westridge Academy, growing with each retelling until it seemed she had mastered the piece overnight while simultaneously curing a rare disease. May found the attention uncomfortable but no longer terrifying. Something fundamental had shifted within her since that day on stage. "You're practically a legend now," Hana teased as they walked across the leaf-strewn quad. The November air was crisp, winter approaching in subtle ways. Shorter days, students bundled in scarves, steam rising from coffee cups clutched in cold hands. May rolled her eyes. "Hardly. People will forget all about it by next semester. I wouldn't count on it. Oh, and Professor Ito asked me to give you this." Hana handed her a folded note. "He caught me after orchestra rehearsal." May opened it, scanning the brief message. "He wants me to come to his office this afternoon." A flutter of anxiety stirred in her stomach. Why wouldn't he just tell me himself? "I have his class tomorrow." Hana shrugged. "No idea. Maybe he's offering you a solo with the orchestra?" The possibility hadn't occurred to May. Since her evaluation performance, she'd focused on catching up with her regular coursework, deliberately avoiding thinking about future performances. Professor Harlow had been surprisingly patient, allowing her to work at her own pace in their lessons. "That seems unlikely," May said, tucking the note into her pocket. "I've only just stopped hiding in practice rooms." But when she arrived at Professor Ito's office that afternoon, she found not just the orchestra conductor, but the entire faculty panel who had witnessed her challenge. Professor Harlow, Dr. Kessler, Mr. Chen, and Headmistress Wu. Ms. Lin, Headmistress Wu, greeted her with a small nod. "Please sit down." May perched nervously on the edge of an empty chair, glancing around at the serious faces. "Have I done something wrong?" "Quite the opposite," Professor Ito said. "We've received an unusual invitation that concerns you." Dr. Kessler slid a cream-colored envelope across the desk. "This arrived yesterday." May opened it carefully, pulling out a heavy card embossed with gold lettering. Her eyes widened as she read, "The Shanghai Philharmonic Orchestra cordially invites May Lin to perform as guest soloist. Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 3 in D minor. December 17th. She looked up in shock. "I don't understand." "The conductor of the Shanghai Philharmonic contacted us directly," Professor Harlow explained. "He was apparently in the audience during your evaluation performance." Suddenly, May remembered the mysterious man she had noticed at the back of the recital hall, the one who had seemed vaguely familiar before disappearing. That was Conductor Zhao? she whispered, hardly believing it. Zhao Wei was a legendary figure in classical music, known for his brilliant interpretations and exacting standards. Indeed, Headmistress Wu confirmed. He was visiting an old colleague, me. A hint of a smile softened her usually composed features. We studied together at the Beijing Conservatory many years ago. He mentioned he was in the area and asked if he might observe some of our students. I suggested he attend your evaluation given the unusual circumstances. May stared at the invitation, her mind racing. But why would he want me to play with the Shanghai Philharmonic? I'm just a student. A very talented student, Mr. Chen corrected gently, and one with an interesting story. Conductor Zhao was quite moved by your performance. There's something else you should know, Professor Harlow added, his expression uncharacteristically gentle. The date of the proposed concert, December 17th, it's the 3-year anniversary of your previous appearance in Shanghai. The significance hit May like a physical blow. December 17th, 2023, the night that had destroyed her confidence and sent her into a 2-year retreat from music. The night she had frozen on stage, unable to play a single note. It's not a coincidence, is it? She asked quietly. Headmistress Wu shook her head. Conductor Zhao was in the audience that night as well. He remembered you immediately when he saw you at the piano last month. The room fell silent as May absorbed this information. The invitation wasn't just an opportunity. It was a chance at redemption, to return to the very place where everything had fallen apart and rewrite her story. You don't have to accept, Dr. Kessler said, breaking the silence. Your progress here has been remarkable, but performing with a professional orchestra is entirely different from a school evaluation. And the timing, Professor Ito added. December 17th is just 5 weeks away. It would mean intensive preparation during the end of the semester. May's hands trembled slightly as she placed the invitation back on the desk. May I have some time to think about it? Of course, Headmistress Wu said. But Conductor Zhao will need an answer by the end of the week. As May left the office, her mind swirled with conflicting emotions. The opportunity was extraordinary. Few students ever got the chance to perform as a soloist with an orchestra of such caliber. But returning to Shanghai, to the very stage where she had experienced the most humiliating moment of her life, she found herself walking automatically toward the practice rooms, needing the comfort of a piano to help her think. To her surprise, Hana was waiting in the hallway outside practice room D. Well, her friend demanded. What did they want? May wordlessly handed over the invitation, watching as Hana's eyes widened in disbelief. The Shanghai Philharmonic. Are you kidding me? This is amazing. Hana's excitement dimmed as she registered May's expression. Isn't it? It's the same hall, May said quietly. The same date. 3 years exactly since. Understanding dawned on Hana's face. Oh, that's intense. Yeah. They sat side by side on the wooden bench outside the practice room, the invitation between them like a challenge neither was sure how to address. What are you going to do? Hana finally asked. May sighed. I don't know. Part of me wants to run as far away from Shanghai as possible, but another part wants to face it head on, Hana finished for her. To go back and show them, show yourself, that you're not defined by what happened that night. May nodded, grateful for her friend's understanding. But what if it happens again? What if I get up there and freeze? It would be even worse this time. A professional orchestra, probably a full house. It won't happen again, Hana said with conviction. You're not the same person you were 3 years ago. You proved that with the Rachmaninoff. That was different. A small audience, a school setting. True. But you still faced your biggest fear and conquered it. Hana bumped May's shoulder gently with her own. Besides, you wouldn't be alone this time. I'd go with you, May looked up in surprise. To Shanghai? But the semester doesn't end until December 20th. Hana shrugged. So I miss a few classes. This is more important. The offer of friendship touched May deeply. 3 years ago, she had faced her failure alone, abandoned by her teacher and isolated in her shame. The thought of having Hana's unwavering support made the prospect of returning to Shanghai slightly less terrifying. I need to play, she decided suddenly. Right now. They entered practice room D together. The familiar old Steinway waited, lid raised like an invitation. May sat at the bench, running her fingers lightly over the keys. What are you going to play? Hana asked, settling into the chair in the corner. Rachmaninoff. I need to feel it again. to see if I can access that same connection I found during the evaluation. May positioned her hands over the keys, took a deep breath, and began to play. The opening chords of the concerto filled the small room, rich and resonant. As she played, May tried to imagine not the cozy practice room but the vast concert hall in Shanghai, hundreds of audience members watching, a full orchestra behind her. The thought sent a tremor through her hands, causing her to fumble a passage. She stopped, frustrated. "Don't try to imagine the whole thing at once," Hannah suggested. "Just think about the music. The rest will follow." May nodded and began again, this time focusing only on the immediate connection, fingers to keys, heart to music. By the time she finished the first movement, she felt more centered, more certain. "I think I'm going to accept," she said quietly. "I need to do this." The next day, May informed the faculty of her decision. Plans were quickly made, a revised practice schedule, arrangements for her to miss the final week of classes, travel details. Professor Harlow would accompany her as her official faculty mentor, and Headmistress Wu pulled strings to allow Hannah to be excused from her finals to travel as May's student companion. The following weeks passed in a blur of intensive preparation. May practiced with renewed purpose, no longer hiding in basement practice rooms but working openly in the main studios. Professor Harlow arranged for her to perform the concerto with the school's student orchestra, giving her a taste of what it would be like to play with accompaniment rather than solo. As the date approached, May received another surprise, a message from conductor Zhao himself, requesting a video call. "I am pleased you accepted our invitation," he said, his dignified face serious on May's laptop screen. "Your performance at Westridge showed great promise." "Thank you for the opportunity," May replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "But may I ask, why me? Why now?" The conductor's expression softened slightly. "Because music is not just about technical perfection, Ms. Lin. It is about resilience, about the human spirit's capacity to overcome. 3 years ago, I saw a talented young pianist crushed by expectation and fear. Last month, I saw that same pianist rise again, stronger for having fallen." His words stayed with May as she boarded the plane to Shanghai, Hannah beside her chattering excitedly about the trip while Professor Harlow reviewed music notations across the aisle. The city looked both familiar and strange as their taxi drove from the airport, gleaming skyscrapers and ancient temples coexisting in the winter light. When they passed the concert hall where she would perform the next evening, May felt a momentary panic but breathed through it, remembering Professor Harlow's guidance. "One note at a time," she whispered to herself. "Tell your story." That evening, after a brief rehearsal with the orchestra, May stood alone on the empty stage, gazing out at the rows of seats that would be filled the following night. This was where it had happened, where her fingers had frozen, where her teacher had turned his back on her, where her confidence had shattered. But as she traced her fingers along the polished surface of the concert grand piano, she realized something important. This was just a place, a beautiful, intimidating place, but still just wood and stone and empty seats. The real challenge had never been the venue or the audience. It had been within herself all along. The next evening, standing backstage in a simple black concert gown, May felt oddly calm. Hannah had helped her prepare, drilling her with breathing techniques and positive visualization. Professor Harlow had given her space, understanding that she needed to find her own path to readiness. 5 minutes, Ms. Lin," the stage manager informed her. She nodded, taking a final deep breath. Through the curtain she could hear the orchestra tuning, the murmur of the audience settling into their seats. Somewhere out there, people who had witnessed her failure 3 years ago would be watching, wondering if history would repeat itself. But also out there was Hannah, her steadfast friend, and Professor Harlow, who had pushed her to find not just technical excellence but emotional truth in her playing. And all the people who had helped her find her way back to music, not as a burden of perfection but as a form of joyful expression. As she walked onto the stage to polite applause, the spotlights momentarily blinding her, May felt not the paralyzing fear she had expected but a strange sort of homecoming. This was where she belonged. She bowed to the audience, then to conductor Zhao before taking her seat at the piano. Her hands found their position over the keys, steady and sure. One note at a time, she thought. And as the orchestra began the introduction, May smiled, ready to tell her story through Rachmaninoff's immortal music, a story not of failure and fear, but of falling and rising again, stronger than before.